Good afternoon and welcome to the symposium, The Legal and Ownership Issues of Microchipping Animals at the Center for Animal Law at the DePaul College of Law. My name is Cherie Travis. I'm an adjunct professor of animal law at DePaul and very happy to be part of this program this afternoon. Some information to share with you. There we will have 5 panelists, people who have a lot of experience in this area. They'll each speak for about 15 minutes, after which we'll have a 5-minute intermission, and then we will have a 45-minute panel discussion. Please don't hesitate to submit questions in the Q&A box. We'll try to get to as many as we can. And if you're an attorney looking for CLE credit and you haven't already submitted your ARDC number, please do so to Brett Davinger at B as in Brett, Davinger minus the R at depaul.edu. I'd like to start off by thanking Professor Maggie Livingston, who is the director and founder of the Center for Animal Law at DePaul. She has been visionary in bringing programs to the public and to the legal community, and we thank her for her dedication and leadership. I also wanted to thank Brett Davinger, the Associate Director at the Center for Animal Law. Brett has been instrumental in all of these programs, and we couldn't do it without him, so thank you, Brett. I also wanted to thank the 2 panelists from Lost Dogs, Illinois, Jeanette Garlow and Susan Taney, who came to us with this idea. They shared with us that although microchips were designed to solve a lot of problems, they've also created other situations, and they felt that it was a timely topic for us to be having a discussion like this and hopefully finding some legislative solutions. So I thank them for coming to us with this great idea. Obviously, it has some interest because we've got a great turnout for the program. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The first panelist is Jeanette Garlow. Jeanette is the director of microchiphelp.com, a nationwide organization dedicated to reuniting lost pets with their families through innovative microchip tracing. Since 2016, she's been an integral part of Lost Dogs Illinois, where she currently serves as co-director and board member. Take it away, Jeanette.
Thank you for having me. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Good?
We're good.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you again for having me. As Cherie said, I am the co-director for Lost Dogs Illinois and the director for microchiphelp.com, also known as Microchip Hunters, and I'm really excited to be here to discuss the issues of microchips. We research dead-end microchips for animal control facilities, shelters, vet clinics, police departments, Good Samaritans, rescues, etc. It shouldn't be this hard to find owner information for a microchipped animal, and it really is time for some regulations. So for those of you who aren't too familiar with microchips, I'm going to start out by a little explanation. A microchip, about the size of a grain of rice, is implanted under the animal's skin, usually between the shoulder blades. Each chip contains a unique identification number. When a lost pet is found, a microchip scanner, which picks up the frequency, reads the microchip's identification number and displays it on the scanner. The microchip number is supposed to be registered with a database, linking it to the owner's contact information. So how it should work when an animal is scanned and a microchip found, the AHA Universal Pet Microchip Lookup Tool should be checked. It is a search engine, not a registry itself, but it allows the users to search the databases of the participating registries to find where the microchip number is registered. When you search in AHA, it will provide one of 3 responses. So it may show us that a chip is registered and to what company, along with contact information for that company. So here you can see that this microchip is registered to 24 Foot Watch, and by contacting them, you should be able to get the owner information. Or it may tell us if the microchip is unregistered and what company to call for information on who they sold the microchip to. This is called the implant facility. So here you can see that this microchip was never enrolled, but it does show you that PetLink is the manufacturer of this microchip. PetLink should be able to provide who they sold the microchip to so that you can contact them for the owner information. Or lastly, AHA might show you a list of manufacturers that possibly manufactured this microchip. As you can see here, the microchip is not enrolled, and there isn't one specific manufacturer to try, but there are multiple manufacturers listed to check with. Oftentimes, these chip companies will have no information at all. So there are currently at least 42 known microchip companies that participate in the AHA registry, but there are many microchip companies that do not, resulting in many animals not getting home. This bar graph shows the number of microchip companies that microchip hunters worked on cases in 2024. So now that you know how microchips are supposed to work in getting animals home, the major problem is how many microchips are never registered to the owner. In 2024, we found that 36.3% of owners never registered their pet's microchip. These percentages include microchips that we can find information for by contacting the implant facility if they are known and if they keep records. People simply forget once they get home with their new pet, or they really don't understand that they personally have to register these microchips for them to work to get their animals home if they go missing. Of almost 20% of the microchip cases that we receive, there is no way of obtaining owner information. This is a huge problem. Microchip Hunter spends a lot of time working to get information on each case submitted to us, so we know that this percentage is even higher for the average facility. So as I mentioned, nearly 20% of our microchip cases have no owner information to be found, and I want to go over some of the many reasons why this happens. The microchip manufacturer cannot be identified. Commonly, these microchips start with the prefix 900, but there are others. Because they don't participate in AHA or other search engines that we try, nobody is aware of where these chips come from. This is the multiple company scenario I explained earlier in AHA. The facility was prohibited from disclosing owner information, even to other animal control facilities or police departments due to their own privacy laws. We have a facility in the south suburb of Chicago that this holds true for. They won't provide owner information to any authorized person that calls in. They will make a call to the owner as a courtesy, and if they answer or get the message, then they'll share where the dog is or the cat. But many times those numbers are disconnected and nobody's allowed to get owner information. We have situations where the microchip company has the sold to facility marked as do not contact. Usually it's a breeder or a pet store. Therefore, the chip company cannot share the facility implant information. One chip company in particular tells us this often, and they attempt to reach the breeder or the store for us to get owner information, and we rarely get a response. Sometimes microchips are distributed at trade shows without tracking who they go to. Microchips are now sold through retailers like Amazon and distributors or vet supply companies with no way to track them at all. Another problem. Facilities only keep records sometimes for a mandatory period of time. We've been told by some vet clinics they only keep records for 5 years if the pet isn't current. We know animals live longer than that. Some low cost and free clinics don't register chips for the owner or keep records by chip number. And, as I said, 36% of owners never register their chips. So these become dead ends. Breeders sometimes sell to pet stores or online puppy brokers and don't track by chip numbers. Dogs are sold at auctions. We have international microchips that are often not registered, and backtracking for those is extremely limited. They have different laws there. Rescues may have microchips registered to themselves and not the adopter and have gone out of business. We have a microchip company can go out of business, shutting down its registry and not sharing it to another registry. As some of you may know, this happened recently last month. Anyone that had a pet registered to this chip company will need to re-register it elsewhere. So if their pet goes missing, there will be information attached. Otherwise, there won't be. Pet stores don't always track by chip number. We have worked on many, many chips from one pet store in particular in Indiana. Microchips were sold to them but never registered, and they don't track by chip number. They told us it's like finding a needle in a haystack. After numerous conversations with them, they now enroll every chip to the adopter one right away. So we're happy about that. Facility is closed even temporarily. I have an example here. This was an unregistered chip with no owner information and no access to owner information because the vet clinic that microchipped this dog was closed. They were closed for 12 days, and someone even went to the clinic and saw this sign posted here. So no information was able to be found. And just a few other microchip issues. Anyone can register a microchip with any manufacturer at any time. So this means a found dog or a dog given to someone can be registered to a new family, and the registration will appear in AHA as the most current, even if the original owner registered and is searching for their pet. So for example, we had an owner register her dog's microchip and she flagged him as lost. Someone had the dog and sold him on Craigslist. It was a little mini doodle. The new family took the dog to a facility in Chicago for vaccines, and the facility scanned the chip and automatically registered it to the new family with another manufacturer. Well, the original family never knew and never got their dog back. The new family already fell in love with him and didn't want to return the dog. Also, owners being listed as secondary contact. We have some rescues that list themselves as primary contact on the microchip registration, causing delays in reuniting, sometimes past the stray hold. They may not answer on a weekend holiday or may have gone out of business. We worked on a chip that had a rescue had listed to them, and the owner was not listed. They were out of the country on a trip, and it took days to hear back. Also, there is a microchip company whose registration doesn't show in AHA right away. It can take about 24 hours, up to 24 hours to show up there, even though it's registered to them. So anyone checking AHA, if the dog was just registered, won't see it. And if you just registered your dog because it went missing, it's an issue. So I hope this helps everyone understand the importance that the registration of the microchip plays in getting missing animals home. We strongly feel that with regulations, many, many more animals will be reunited to their families, freeing up space at these overcrowded facilities. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jeanette. That was a really great overview, and obviously you've already touched on many issues that we'll be talking about and certainly highlight concerns. The next person who'll be speaking is Lauren Malmberg. Lauren served as the Animal Control Director Administrator for the City and County of Peoria for 36 years. Under her direction, a new animal shelter was constructed. The new animal ordinances were completely revised. The animal ordinances were completely revised, and the animal control program included many community initiatives, including public safety and humane treatment of animals. Now retired, Lauren continues to work with the state association, teaching workshops and training in animal control and animal welfare issues. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you, and thanks to DePaul University for this opportunity to talk about this issue, which has been a bit of a problem for animal shelters and animal control facilities for some time. So I appreciate the opportunity. Basically, the three basic issues that we feel face us with regard to microchips is that initially touted as being a, perfect way to get an animal back home, it really doesn't denote ownership. A microchip may be one element of ownership, but what it actually does is it defines which animal you're looking at. It actually identifies a particular animal. Another issue is that microchips are widely misunderstood by the public and even the agencies that do the implanting. And microchip registries are a lot unaware and unresponsive to the limitations and the problems with chips for everything from transferring registrations to following up when we need to contact them. The problems with migration, the problems with the scanners and the scanners picking up the chips, all of those things have been generally not taken into consideration by the microchip companies. So Illinois law has a lot of requirements for animal control facilities and animal shelters in regard to microchips. Just real quickly, when an animal comes into a facility, a stray animal, it has to be scanned within 24 hours of entering the facility. We are required to notify both the primary and secondary contacts on that microchip if there is one found. Animals must be microchipped before they're reclaimed by their owners if they've been picked up running at large. Animals have to be microchipped before they're adopted or placed or returned to field. Animals have to be microchipped if they have bitten a person. If a dog is declared dangerous or vicious, it has to be microchipped. There is a caveat in the Illinois law that says microchip clinics should be offered by animal control facilities, and we do have immunity for implanting chips if there is an issue there. So microchips are featured a lot in the Animal Control Act. So who is the owner on a microchipped animal? If you look at the Animal Control Act, the owner definition does not have any microchip language included. It does not refer to the microchip at all. And in fact, it excludes feral cats who are microchipped from being owned. So it's not, while it can be an element of ownership, it is not definitive. Some of the problems that animal control often face is that we'll have an animal come into a facility with a microchip that goes one place and a current rabies tag that goes another. The other issue is that while it requires us to notify somebody who is on the microchip, primary or secondary contact, we are not required to return the animal to them. That does not mean that they own the animal. So we have some problems with that kind of a thing when somebody who is notified that the animal that they originally had microchipped maybe 5 years ago and have since given away is now at an animal shelter and they want to invoke their right to reclaim it. It's not their animal if they've sold it or given it away and they haven't had it for the last 4 years. So that presents a problem right there. So we have other ways of identifying owners as well, for those animals that come in with a chip that goes to one person and perhaps other indications that it goes to another. There are challenges in scanning and implanting these microchips. It's really tough on a super aggressive dog or a feral cat to scan effectively, because the animals are difficult to get that scanner over the areas that you need to get it over without putting yourself at risk. Sometimes the chips aren't performing right. Sometimes the scanners aren't performing right. Chips can migrate. We found chips back in the hip area. We have found chips implanted into the stifle of the animal. Sometimes that's a migration issue. Sometimes that's an improper implantation because the animal is too aggressive to put it where it was supposed to go. Animals can have multiple chips. I know that in my experience, we've had dogs that have 2 or even 3 chips, because when the animal came into a facility and it got scanned, the chip didn't get picked up, so they chipped it again. So it's a possibility that an animal is going to have more than one chip. And it is extremely dangerous to microchip an aggressive dog. And that's one of the things that we're required to do as animal control. So we're trying to figure out a way to safely do that. without having to sedate the animal or whatever. But we need to implant those chips before they go out the door, and some of these dogs are resistant to us handling them like that. Tracking the chip information, as Jeanette mentioned, is really a problem. One of the reasons is that owners don't register their chips. Maybe they don't even know that the animal that they have has a chip. And they don't update the changes in address or phone or ownership when they give the animal away or sell the animal or take it to an animal control or animal shelter. New microchip companies pop up all the time, and it's difficult to know where a good clearinghouse for these registration for the chips are. It's tough to know where to go when you have a new chip company who doesn't, like Jeanette was talking about, subscribe to AHA. Those microchips that are purchased at the retailers like Amazon, those typically are not tracked. Sometimes we have run into problems with animals that have been turned over to animal control or animal shelters, trying to transfer the chip that they have to a new owner. Sometimes the companies are resistant to that. There are a lot of different processes or procedures you have to undergo. Sometimes there's a cost involved. So they don't make it easy. And I appreciate that they have to be concerned about somebody doing it with negative intent, like they're trying to transfer a chip to themselves on an animal that doesn't belong to them. But when we're trying to do a legitimate transfer, it can really be difficult. And if we have the animal because it was impounded on a cruelty case, or it was impounded and the person didn't want to reclaim it because they didn't want to pay fees, and they don't agree to the transfer of that chip information, the companies will often acquiesce to those people, and we can't get that chip transferred. Sometimes the registration of the chip is to the entity that implanted it, whether it was a veterinary clinic or a low cost or free clinic or anybody that has really no ownership in the animal. It was just the entity that implanted it. So it doesn't indicate that this is an individual owner. Some other challenges that we faced is microchip companies often impede us from getting the owner information in a timely manner. When we pick up an animal that's been hit by a car or is otherwise threatened physically or in danger or injured or sick, and we find a chip in it, we want to get in touch with that owner immediately so we know what to do with that animal for them and get them and their pet reunited. We will often have microchip companies say, give me the chip number, we will call the owner and have them call you. That's unacceptable. That's just a delay, and that harms the animal. Also, if the animal's been involved in a bite case or some other serious attack of some sort, having a microchip company intervene is inappropriate. Sometimes microchip companies don't call you back for 2 or 3 days to help you trace that tag or trace that chip number. So as I said before, another challenge is that the animal comes in with a rabies tag and a microchip, and the owner information does not jibe. We have to deal with figuring out why that owner information doesn't jibe. But in the end, in our community, the rabies tag takes precedence over the microchip. We have situations where private animal shelters or rescues or other types of groups will not allow the new adopter to register the chip in their name. They keep that registration to that group, and they don't want to give us the adopter's name, either because they want to get the animal back and give it to the owner themselves, or because they don't feel the owner deserves the animal back and they want to just come pull the animal from the facility. That's not acceptable, because that adopting animal was adopted or sold, or however you want to look at it, and it is now the property of the person who adopted it. It is not their pet. So that's a little bit of a problem there. We can't just impound somebody's animal and then turn it back to the facility that sold it to them. The biggest issue, I think, the biggest concern that we have is those people who find stray animals in the community, and instead of calling animal control or taking it to an animal shelter or an animal control facility, they try to rehome it because they think it's lost and there's no identification. And that's because the animal could be chipped, but they have no way of knowing that unless they have the animal scanned. And many people don't even understand what a microchip is, so they don't know to take it to get it scanned. So this animal has got maybe a microchip with good information, but it's not available to the people who have found it because they don't even know it exists. We think what needs to change is owner education. We need to educate the public on what a microchip can do and what it can't do. And we need to expressly convey that we cannot rely on a microchip to help a lost animal in every situation. It is a helpful tool, but it's not the magic button. It does not always get your animal home. The basic thing that will get your animal home is a collar and ID tag that's current. That's going to get your animal home in the fastest way, because somebody on the street who finds an animal can look at the tag, read the phone number, give you a call, and you can get your animal without even having to involve animal control or an animal shelter. A microchip doesn't work that way. And we have to make sure people understand the importance of keeping good information updated in the registration of their microchip. Many people just register it and then they forget that they even have it, and it never gets updated. We need to have universal scanners for microchips in as many hands as possible in every animal shelter, in every animal control facility, in the hands of the police department, sheriff's department, veterinarians. Everybody should have, everybody who could come across a stray animal, a scanner would be fabulous. You can just wave it over the top and try to track that number. We also need legislative changes to establish the standardization of chips and scanners and a national database of microchip contact information that microchip companies are required to contribute to. There has to be some regulation of that so that we don't have these pop-up companies that then don't provide any registration or after sale service. And then we also need to strengthen our laws governing ownership definitions and the responsibilities of having strays scanned, so that if someone does find a stray animal, they know that they can call animal control and have somebody come over and scan it, or run it to their vet and have somebody scan it, so that they realize that they may have somebody's pet. Just because it doesn't have a collar and tag on it doesn't mean it doesn't have identification somewhere. So those are kinds of the things that we face in animal control, and some of the things that we would like to see changed to benefit the animals and their owners.
Well, I'm not on screen.
Were you done, Lauren?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. I was actually looking at some of the questions that were coming in, so I was momentarily distracted. So thank you. You've brought up a number of important questions, and obviously this could be a lot of interesting discussion as we go. The next speaker is Zandra Anderson. Zandra is a Texas trial attorney. She is an attorney who's practiced animal law exclusively since 2005. She's represented or counseled with owners and their animals in matters regarding ownership disputes, dangerous dog declarations, animal cruelty, and cases involving pet professionals and animal businesses. She's had cases involving liability issues concerning animal professionals, rescue organizations, and dogs that injure people or pets. So welcome, Zandra.
Hi, how are you? It's very nice to be here. Thank you very much for this invitation and opportunity. Rob, that's obscuring what I'm looking at. Today, we're here on the implications of microchips in pet ownership disputes, or as I like to call it, the growling, the hissing of dog and cat owners all over the country. These are my animals, the first iterations of Dalmatians, then it was American Pit Bull Terriers, and it didn't advance. Sorry, we're having a glitch here. It's not working. Can you advance it for me? And this is Ziggy. He is an American Staffordshire Terrier. He's the love of my life. And he's a grand champion. He loves dock diving, lure coursing, and everything. He went from the grand champion ring you see above to the best ring of all, which was Meet the Breed, where he was giving kisses. Next. This is Zane. He is a champion as well. And he also loves dock diving and lure coursing of all kinds, and just generally his language of love is play with me, as you can see. Those are my dogs. Yes, they're both microchip. I have invested mostly in my heart with my dogs, and I don't want to lose them. So that's one of the ways that we can safeguard the ownership of our pets. So what are the experts saying in regards to microchips? The experts are saying ownership. For example, American Veterinary Medical Associates, they talk about the ability of the chip to help get the animal returned to the owner. Humane Society of the United States, many owners turn to microchips, and the statistics show that you are much more likely to be returned, the pet is returned to the owner rather than animals who lack them. And of course, the American Animal Hospital Association as well. So the notion is that the purpose of the chip is to determine ownership. However, why do pets owners have microchips implanted? Yes, to prove ownership. But do microchips really prove ownership? Not always. Microchips are an indication of ownership, but are not completely dispositive of the ownership issue. The next, what you're going to see are some well, first of all, the law. In many states have lost property statutes for animals. Texas does. We're a livestock state. So we have what are called stray laws when the livestock get out. So we have those to follow. That is not true in dogs. And if a dog gets out and is found by someone, dogs all over the country are considered property. So there is this notion that there is a bailment, a common law bailment, so that the possessor of the animal that they found, the dog, for example, is actually the bailer, and they can recover their expenses for maintaining the dog, but the finder of lost property is considered to have a superior right as to all others because they found the property, but not as to the true owner. So that's the common law. The common law is that if you find a dog, it is for the purpose of returning that dog to its true owner. In the case of Lyra versus the Greater Houston German Shepherd Dog Rescue, in that case, probably 10 chips wouldn't have mattered, but this case was actually settled by the Supreme Court 9 years ago yesterday to the date. And in that case, what is very important is the ownership of dogs and property and how that shakes out in our law. In this case, the dog you see there is a German Shepherd dog. He was 7 years old at the time. He'd been with his family, the Lyras, since he was 8 weeks old. He got out for the first time in his life. That's a picture of him in his super dog costume. And he was helping the family give out candy on Halloween shortly before he went missing, which was a couple of months later. Interestingly, when I had to sue to get this dog back. So when I questioned the president of the German Shepherd Dog Rescue, my question is, if your dog out, would you want it back? Yes or no? Yes, I would want my dog back. But for some reason, they did not want to give it back to the owner. The dog had been listed incorrectly at the animal shelter, as you can see, as a Belgian Malinois. And Lily had gone to get her dog. They were closed for redemption. This is back when redemption was not as prevalent as it was today in terms of the hours being shelters were open for redeeming pets. She was assured to look on Pet Harbor, which she did religiously, never saw a German Shepherd dog that was her, but that was because the dog was listed wrong. So it was transferred to the rescue organization. They had it for a day and didn't want to give it back. But the important thing in that case, we did get the dog back. There were no local or state laws saying that the impoundment of a dog loses the owner's rights. And she didn't abandon her dog. She was purposefully looking for her dog. But the important things in animal ownership that come out of this case, and it's the only Supreme Court case in the state of Texas on ownership, still relevant and current on how ownership is viewed and how property is viewed. Importantly, the case stated the law abhors a forfeiture of property. It is a foundational liberty, not just a contingent privilege of ownership. And importantly, the case of Strickland versus Medlin in Texas was really a case about whether or not the death of a dog was going to trigger sentimental value. And in that case, the Supreme Court recognized that dogs are a special form of personality, not just like a table or a chair. And that was also stated in the Lyra case, which was 3 years later. A forfeiture of owners' rights are not favored by the courts, and laws will be construed to prevent rather than to cause such a forfeiture. And it extrapolated all of that Texas law and came to the conclusion that a beloved companion dog is not a fungible inanimate object, let's say like a toaster. And so the rule is surely applicable here to Monty, who did go back to his family. So the law itself is an important reason why microchips are important in protecting the ownership rights. The law certainly favors it, but the microchip helps further what the law intends. There are implications of microchips for dogs. Dogs are valuable, and cats for things of the heart way more than they are in terms of money. But as you can see, that some people also invest a lot of money in, for example, a service dog. Or you can see that's Uno the Beagle, who was the Westminster champion 1 year, not too long ago. You have hunting dogs, herding dogs, and of course, police dogs. They all have value beyond what most dogs would have just as a pet. But also, microchips are important for those to whom we entrust our dogs and cats. Veterinarians, pet sitters, boarding facilities, doggy day cares, rescue organizations. They too want to keep up with their dogs and cats that occasionally do get out. So the microchip is not only important for the owners, but for those to whom we entrust our beloved pets. Now, this is a case, it's an interesting case because in Texas and in other places as kids, we think finders, keepers, losers, weepers. Not in Texas, and quite frankly, not anywhere. And no, possession is not 90% of the law like a lot of people think. So the case we're going to talk about is how a veterinarian got hit with a felony grand jury subpoena over a microchip. So welcome to Texas. Here it couldn't happen anyplace else. This dog had a microchip implanted, but it was not registered. And interestingly, it was from the foster of the rescue organization where she got the dog. She was a foster failure. So importantly, let's go for one default in the law. Who can legally impound dogs? Well, in the state of Texas, legally, those who can impound dogs, and this is true in other venues, the local's rabies control authority, in other words, animal control, or that officer's designee. Now, occasionally, if you have a small, like I live in a tiny city, we don't have animal control. We contract animal control for with the neighboring city. So that's the officer's designee. So you first have to think, who can really impound the dog? Well, truly, it's animal control and not Good Samaritans, unless they, at least in Texas, have the intent to give the dog back to the owner. So this dog had a chip, and although it wasn't registered to the owner, it was registered to the rescue. So you would think this is a slam dunk return to the owner, right? Well, the vet calls the rescue organization and makes an interesting decision. And really, at that time, the only one he could make. He was in an ethical conundrum because the finder of the dog had come in with the dog. And at that time, and this is still true in many venues, a veterinarian could not violate that confidential relationship between the veterinarian and client, to wit, his long-standing client who found the little wiener dog. So he wouldn't tell the rescue organization. He wouldn't tell the rescue organization who had the dog, so the foster could get her dog back. And not only that, they send over a sheriff, believe it or not, who got involved. And he said, we can't talk to you without a subpoena. Great. So here we are. There's lots of barking and howling. The finder doesn't want to give back the wiener because she thought the dog was out. And so this is a bad owner. The owner and the kids are crying because somebody's having a birthday and the little boy wanted his little Heidi back for his 3rd birthday. The sheriff is mad because the vet staff was snippy. That's what he actually said. And the vet is really mad because he can't talk without a subpoena. Everybody's mad. We got a hornet's nest here. And believe me, I can't make this stuff up. So the sheriff said, well, you want a subpoena? I'll get you one. So consider it done. And the vet was served with not only just a subpoena, but a grand jury subpoena for felony theft. Now this wiener dog is making somebody a felon. So everybody's mad and how to really unravel this mess. Well, certainly the chip was helpful in getting the dog back, but so was a nice letter with pictures that I sent to the vet to show the finder that this was a nice family. The vet said, but hey, I'm in trouble. I'll fix that for you too. If we can get this dog back, everybody's going to win. And that's what happened. And even the finder was invited to the birthday party for the little boy. It turned out great. Doesn't always turn out that way. The next case to talk about is one where the microchip was implanted, but not registered. So in this case, a finder was actually an attorney, and she found this cat, but the family had dutifully tried to find cat. Cat accidentally got it out when they were moving. And so the finder took the cat to the vet, and they said, we have a policy. We always check for the microchips, see if there's owner. The person said, yes, please do it. But the staff said, do you want the cat if the owners don't want the cat anymore? Because that actually happens. Absolutely, I want the cat. That's what she said. So here we go. It begins with the roar because she changed her mind after they gave the cat to the true owner. Because indeed, the true owners did want the cat. They'd been dutifully looking for the cat, and they couldn't find the cat because it had been, put away with someone for 3 weeks. So the attorney wrote a nastygram to the vet and said that she was going to sue her for $25,000 for the cat. I'm not sure where that amount came up, but there it was. And she was citing an article, which a veterinarian and I had actually written. But this article was written prior to the changing of the law. So the law added an exception for vets in terms of their confidentiality requirements. So as you can see, in 2019, it was added that as a part of good faith effort to determine the ownership of an animal, the vet gets a pass with regard to the confidentiality. So the vet was safe. And fortunately, the hissing ended up with a meow because the true owners got their pet back and the attorney backed off. The next case is about a microchip that was registered but altered. No, it doesn't happen. Well, it did. The cat owners actually contacted the rescue and would like to know if on Saturday their vet was open because her cat that she had gotten from them, she believed had a UTI. They took the cat to the vet, and then they decided the unthinkable is they decided they weren't going to give it back. And they decided to contact the chip company, despite the fact that the chip was duly registered to the owner who had adopted / purchased the cat from the rescue, because the rescue had purchased the batch of chips without contacting the owner. The company changed the chip into the rescue's name and took the true owner's name off of it. Then what happened is unbelievable and unthinkable. They decided that they were not going to give the cat back because the owner was disabled. And how could she possibly give the cat the medicine? I know these things I can't make up. She's in a wheelchair. She's been disabled her entire life. And fortunately, the most difficult thing that I had was convincing the judge that, in fact, this actually happened. But in Texas, there's also a good little thing to note, and there are other jurisdictions that have this. The altering of evidence, which the microchip was evidence of proof, is a felony in the state of Texas. So we used a little bit of pressure there and got the cat back. And finally, the beauty of this was the people who had the cat realized. Then they said, they sold us down the river. It's not your fault. And the owner got her cat back. And the beautiful thing of that was she put the people who had her cat into her will so that if she passed away and they were still living, they would get the cat. It was a beautiful ending that turned into, instead of hissing, purring. It's not advancing, Rob. It's not advancing.
We're just about out of time in any event. There we go.
Can I finish one quick thing?
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so this was, there are 3 more kinds, and this is the end anyway, that just to think about. There are microchips that are accidentally, they're registered, but accidentally wasn't scanned. I represented a rescue that this happened to. Animal control didn't scan. The rescue didn't scan. But we ended up working out a deal where the mom, who had 6 kids, was okay with placing the dog. Had been gone for a couple of months anyway before this was discovered. There are also situations where cases where the microchip was registered, but as another speaker mentioned, had gravitated and deactivated, we're not sure. And then there are cases where animals are co-owned and they're registered to one owner. Happy Tales, everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Very interesting and never a dull moment, of course, when you're working with animals. So thank you, Zandra. I next wanted to introduce Susan Taney from Lost Dogs, Illinois. Susan is a former director and founder of Lost Dogs, Illinois, and co-founder of Lost Dogs of America. With 35 years in animal welfare, Susan has worked in shelters across the Midwest and East Coast, including Ozaki, I hope I'm saying that right, Humane Society, MSPCA Nevins Farm and Equine Center, Doberman Rescue Unlimited, and Dog Orphans. Looking forward to hearing what Susan has to say.
Okay. All right, I'm getting there. Okay, I'm going to talk about not all stray dogs are homeless. And as Cherie mentioned, I started Lost Dogs Illinois about 15 years ago. And the reason why we started this was that we found out people really don't know what to do when they lose a dog, or even what to do if they find a dog. People are pretty much clueless. And what we also notice that when people do find dogs, they really, there's no place for them to list a found dog. So that's why we started our Facebook page, and then later on we got into a database where we could do this. I just gotta, okay. And, whoops, excuse me, just a minute here. So the greatest risk to lost dogs is that they'll be kept by a finder, rehomed, adopted down, or euthanized before the family can locate them. And as I have personal experience in that, I actually lost 2 dogs within 2 months from 2 different vet clinics in 2 different cities. And let's just say my anxiety was to the ceiling. And I was really afraid that someone would keep my dogs or they'd get to a rescue and the rescue would also keep my dogs, because there's really no laws on what a good Samaritan is to do when they find a dog. So, Good Samaritan laws. And just so you know that some of this does correspond with microchipping, but I am going to bring up some things that we have found from the public side, which is going on with stray dogs. First of all, Illinois has no law requiring what a finder or a Good Samaritan must do when they find a lost dog. Now, some national organizations suggest that Good Samaritans keep the dog in their home instead of taking them to animal control or a stray holding facility. We need to make sure Good Samaritans are doing their due diligence to find the dog's family. For example, as Lauren mentioned, there's nothing out there to say for a Good Samaritan to take the dog in and get it scanned by a vet clinic or by animal control or a shelter. We're very fortunate, at least in the Chicago area and other counties, that we have a lot of citizens who have their own scanners, and they will go out and scan dogs. But again, as you heard from Jeanette, many times those microchips are not registered, the information is not current, and they don't know about microchiphelp.com. As I said before, there's a lack of a central clearinghouse to list dogs that have been found by Good Samaritans. Actually, there is, but it's Lost Dogs Illinois, but that is not encouraged for people to do that or even to have them posted on the animal control facility website. A lot of times there's a dispute between the owner and the finder about giving the dog back. The finder or the child falls in love with the dog, and they just don't want to give it back, even if it has a microchip. The owner lives in a questionable neighborhood. We call that zip code discrimination. We actually had that happen when a family found a dog in a questionable neighborhood, brought it up to their own neighborhood, and in the meantime, the finder did find out where his dog was, and those people went ahead and changed the microchip into their name. And that was done through their veterinarian. And so the finder never got his dog back. We find out there's a lot of language barrier and cultural limitations. And that even goes back to people not understanding why they need to have their microchip registered, or they need to have it changed when they move. So there is that language barrier that we have to get over, and we have to figure out how we're going to get around that and help those people. A lot of times a Good Samaritan will find a dog that's been matted or it's lost weight. And that can be that can happen quickly. There are some breeds that they lose weight quickly, or they mat really fast. A lot of times in a Good Samaritan issue, we will recommend that the owner goes to the police. And sometimes the police are not able to help, or they just don't want to help in getting the dog back. We have issues where the Good Samaritan lives out of town, county, or state, and they're passing through and they take the dog with them and give them to another shelter or rescue or to a friend to hold the dog. And as I said before, microchip companies do change the ownership to the finder or a rescue without confirmation from the family. Deceased animals. Deceased animals are being disposed without being scanned for microchips or checking for IDs. Now, in Chicago, the dogs are scanned by Streets and Sanitation, but we believe that they should be rescanned once they arrive to a vet clinic or a shelter. First of all, streets and sanitation employees are not trained in how to scan. Animal control facility and vet clinic employees are trained, and you can train through a plastic bag. So you really don't have to take a dog out of a plastic bag. Dogs that are found on state highways or interstates are not scanned and are just taken to a disposal site. Families deserve to have closure. I know I would want closure. I'm going to talk a little about our Animal Welfare Act in Illinois, that no animal may accept a stray dog or cat unless the animal is reported by the shelter to animal control or law enforcement of the county in which the animal is found by the next business day. Our definition of animal shelter also include rescues. We know that this is not being followed. And if it is being followed, we know animals are not being posted on a public website for lost and found dogs. Again, how is someone to find their loved family member? And just so you know, in Cook County, there are over 130 municipalities, which means there are several places for a dog or a cat to be held. Again, back to section 3.6, acceptance of stray dogs and cats. If an animal is scanned and they found they have a microchip or they have an ID, a mail notice shall remain the primary means of an owner, agent, or a caretaker to contact. And they also say they can be by other contact information such as telephone or email address. But we have found in our last 15 years of communicating with finders and owners of lost dogs that texting is the most preferred way to communicate. So we believe that should be added into section 3.6. Let's be a little bit progressive and let's get these animals back home. One thing that we have found a lot is that the animal shelter, which includes rescues in definition, shall allow access to the public to view the animals housed there. If the dog is identified by an owner who desires to make redemption of it, the dog should be transferred to the local animal control for redemption. We do know, and we have examples of rescues and shelters or facilities and shelters not allowing the potential owners to see a dog in person for confirmation that rescue and shelter makes the decision for the owner, and that's just not appropriate or right. Short stray holds. There are challenges with short stray holds, even with microchipped animals. Again, everything that I listed before prevents animals being reunited with their families. And I know the whole background why there are short stray holds, but I guess we need to get more challenges taken care of so people can get their lost dogs home. Also, we deal with different redemption fees within the county and city. For example, City of Chicago Animal Control charges $65 to redeem an animal, which includes rabies, microchip vaccines, spay, neuter, and also boarding. So if a lost dog is held by a contracted stray holding facility or rescues, sometimes they're charged for all the services. And that cost is usually set by the vet clinic or the rescue that they're using. This becomes really cost prohibitive for an owner to claim their dog. So maybe we need to relook at this law and make it more available for all people to get their dogs back home. Now, I will say this, I do know there are shelters that do waive any fees or veterinary cost. And we really appreciate that. That is very helpful. So in conclusion, we have worked with thousands. We probably have listed between 50 to 70,000 lost and found dogs on our site. We know firsthand that state and county lines need to be updated. Animals aren't just property, they're family. But because the law sees them only as property, rescues and shelters don't always focus on reuniting lost dogs and with their loved ones. I think it's time for policies to reflect the deep bond between people and their pets and make reunification a top priority. And I know that our presenter before just talked about how she was able to use the laws in Texas. But I think what happens in other states that we don't have lawyers that really know the law and how to use them so we can get our pets back when there's an issue to their owners. So thank you very much. I appreciate all our participants. I appreciate our people who are presenting. And I also thank Cherie for allowing us to make this a subject that needs to be discussed. Thank you again.
Thank you, Susan. That was very informative. Everyone's bringing up a lot of interesting issues that we'll be talking about more in the panel discussion after the break. Our next presenter, let's see. Can we click out?
I'm trying to click to exit.
So I'll go ahead and introduce our next presenter is Jane McBride. She's the president of Illinois Humane, an organization she co-founded that is dedicated to the investigation of cruelty and neglect and the recovery of victim animals. The organization also provides advocacy, including work in the area of animal control operations reform. Illinois Humane has worked to support government shelters as they face pressure from high rates of intake in the post-pandemic years. And in 2023, she was the recipient of the ABA's Excellence in the Advancement of Animal Law Awards. So welcome, Jane.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it a great deal. I just want to put this over here. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is what the current conditions are with the shelters and how that is kind of highlights the fault lines with these microchips. And I'm going to use a war story from an experience that we had with animals that were extremely skittish animals just by nature, which is these Carolina dogs that came in from a breeder gone south. So just a quick overview on the situation with shelters. And I know a lot of people are aware of this at this point, but we are now way down the line. It is a crisis and a long-standing crisis, but Shelter Animals Count executive director made this statement recently, quite literally a crisis in shelters, and some of them are making the decision to close their doors, reduce hours, reduce the kind of animals that they bring in. And in fact, in the third quarter of 2024, Carbondale Humane Society closed its doors after over 70 years of operation as an open intake facility due to a lack of adoptions and inability to garner resources. They haven't closed completely. They've shifted their emphasis, but they are no longer available for sheltering services in Carbondale, which is a big void in that community. So just some quick information. In 2023, 48% of the animals came in as strays, which is important for the microchip world. 25% were surrendered by their owners. Shelters across the country are full and now entering their fourth year. So that's 2023 is the fourth year, especially for dogs. And this may cause them, they're operating there at overcapacity, and it's really taking a toll. So what are the key issues? So now we're into 2024. That's a fifth year of this crisis. The issues many of us know are overcrowding, fewer adoptions, increased euthanasia, strained resources, economic factors, rising costs of living and housing restrictions, pet-friendly housing is hard to find, stray dogs, again, pandemic effects, animals are actually coming back. Here in Chicago, in the middle of 2024, and 4 months in, saw a 16% increase in euthanasia. Los Angeles is facing a crisis nationwide. Mid-year 2024, shelter count recorded almost 330,000 more pets having entered the shelter system. 2025, sixth year of this. Animal shelters across the U.S. are facing a crisis due to overcrowding, surge in unwanted animals, exacerbated health factors like housing affordability issues, rising vet costs, and are leading to longer stays for animals. Just this past week, the last 2 calls I got were people having to move for whatever reason. A gal was moving in with her grandmother. Another one was moving, couldn't keep her cats. People are still moving around like crazy and they can't accommodate their animals. So this was interesting, something I found, that this community is coming together. Evansville, Indiana. This was January 2025. They were actually having a town hall meeting to discuss their challenges. The shelter overcrowding. They were bringing their folks together to see what the community can do, which I think was just a wonderful effort because it truly is a community problem. Again, overcrowding, strained resources. This is the 2025 backup, rising costs, housing affordability, compassion fatigue. And this gets into my war story a little bit. Staff and volunteers are experiencing incredible compassion fatigue due to this overwhelming nature of the crisis and the long-standing crisis. Just all sorts of community issues are contributing to this. Okay, so this is the story I would like to tell. On October 1st, 2023, in Sangamon County, there was we've had a number of breeders go bad. They just ran out of resources. They burned out. Whatever happened, they went south. And when a breeder goes south, you've got and these were very serious neglect situations. So the following photo is only a third of the animals that came in. These are Carolina dogs. I'll talk a little bit about the nature of these animals. This is after a month of recovery. They all came in at about a 3.9 body score. So they came in at about 30 pounds. They should be 50-pound dogs. Okay, for Carolina, we knew nothing about Carolina dogs. We had no idea what they were, but they are believed to be a Native American dog breed descended from primitive dogs that actually migrated over the Bering Land Bridge. And they're compared to Australian dingoes all the time. So this is Laveau and her daughter Rabbit, and these were the youngest 2 that came in. This is in their adoptive home, ultimately. I love that photo. Okay, so possible ancestry is suggested. Native American dogs. So they were discovered, so to speak, by this ecology geneticist who was working in South Carolina. And they were free-roaming dogs. And he decided to start looking at them and perhaps domesticate them. And they're known for their physical resemblance to dingoes, as I said. And the pointed ears, the fox-like snout, the tail that curves up. Considered a pariah breed, which means they live on the outskirts of human civilization. So when you see a diorama of a Indian village in museums, sometimes you'll see their quote unquote domestic dog, and they quite often resemble these Carolina dogs, and they have what is called a primitive temperament, a semi-wild nature to them. What did this mean for us handling and placing them? They are skittish as can be when you're taking them out, very suspicious because they're still a pack animal that would come into an area in the great outdoors. So if you think how packs enter an area, they're suspicious, they're alert, they're watching, and they will trigger quickly. Primitive temperament. Many of these dogs were only a generation or 2 from being wild caught that we have learned in the process that coming out of a breeder situation. So not only are they skittish as a breed, but they're coming out of a breeder situation where socialization was dropping off. They're being kept in crates. 3 dogs actually were found starved in crates that were zip tied. Extreme flight risk during the sheltering in the first month or 2 of placement. When they run, they go to ground. You will not be able to find them. They can survive in the wild, and they are burrowers. How did we get involved? Okay, Sangamon County got in touch with us because we've got strong background in working with neglected animals. So when this happened, I call it the Carolina dog diaspora. We were getting calls from all over the country asking to help with the situation. There were folks that were somewhat onto the fact that this breeder in Auburn, Illinois was having trouble. So we're just like going, who are all these people? Why did they know there was a problem? Are they part of the problem? Who are these folks? So Sangamon County asked us to step in and help work through these calls. These were neglected dogs. They had very significant needs for careful placement, and we were also going to provide some medical care to support these adoptions. As I said, as noted in that long list of problems right now, vet care is very expensive, and so we have supported these dogs. I actually supported one just recently that came up with mammary tumors. We helped pay for that, even though that dog's been adopted now for over a year, but we still are supporting these adopted, and we screened all these inquiries very carefully. So this gets to Fawn. Fawn was one of these dogs. You can see this is when this picture was taken when she wasn't when she was newly into the shelter. She was 9 years, 7 months old. These were the impacts she was suffering. And so and this is just a close-up. You can see the sores, the mammary development. Things got out of control with this breeder on occasion. There were fights, so she had some bite wounds. Okay, so we got a call from this woman in North Carolina who was familiar with these dogs, and she asked if a rescue she worked with could take one of these dogs. And so here's the original message I got from them. And so, you know, we needed to place these animals as quickly as possible. When 30 animals come in to an already crowded shelter, we're doing everything we can to figure out who can take these animals and who might be responsible. So yeah, I'm thinking North Carolina. They should know, maybe they will help. So all sorts of discussion to arrange transport. I spent much time with Jan at the rescue. Early on, we decided that we cannot use rescue transport with these guys. They're just too much of a flight risk. So my husband and I drove these Fawn out to Virginia. Fawn was fostered originally by the shelter's director. Okay, during this time, we were juggling the medical treatment for these 30 animals. We had a number of other significant animals that we were helping animal control with, which included a lot of significant medical care, including trips back and forth to university clinics. And we had another large intake ourselves we were dealing with. They refused to deal with animal control. We were trying to get cooperation and bring those animals in gradually. So we had our hands full. The shelter had their hands full. So we took these. So on December 2nd, I get this email from Jan. I'm really sorry to get in touch with you. We lost Fawn. And oh, by the way, I never re-registered her microchip. Unfortunately, I have to get a hold of you to see if, you know, so to give you a heads up in case somebody contacts you about the chip. Great. So county animal control had only been about a year into some serious operational reforms, gradually bringing in partners. Our arrangement with the county was, in this case, we would place a dog. Custody would be transferred to Illinois Humane, and we would finalize the paperwork with the adopter, including full disclosure of everything and the registration transfer. For most of these animals, they were implanted with 24 pet chips, and we were having the adopters register them directly with 24 pet. As evidence, Jan didn't get this done. So when I went into 24 pet, wherein I had to set up an account for Illinois Humane. So the county was representing that they were re-registering these animals with Illinois Humane. Again, this is now only about 2 or 3 weeks into this massive intake for us. And so I said, okay, great guys, you're getting that done. I was told to register the animals through either for Chameleon or directly. What ultimately came to light is none of the information they entered for Illinois Humane was correct. It was old or something, and I had no access to the account. So I'm learning all of this and the anxiety of having lost Fawn on a Sunday. So I ultimately got to 24 Pet, who told me Fawn's chip was registered to absolutely no one. On about the third call back, they finally told me who the manufacturer of the chip was, but the chip itself was not registered. I asked how this could happen. She said perhaps the chip implanted was part of a sample provided by the company and never registered. And she agreed to put out an alert. So that went out 5:50 that morning. And this is what the alert was. It was wrong. It was, she just used all sorts of information that she had for Illinois Humane and made some assumptions about where this dog was. So now we've got a faulty alert out there. All right, so this is who the chip was registered to, or who the manufacturer was. And this is their representations. They are the newest, the latest and greatest. And if you can see, request a sample, just make it that easy. So evidently that's what this breeder did. When it's scanned and animal control, acknowledged it and put it on all her disclosure papers, but it never got re-registered. Ultimately, I was able to get 24 Pet to fully correct the alert and also confirm that Fawn's chip was at least registered to 24 Pet. So with that information, now I see that another one of our dogs that we had in foster care at that point also had one of these chips. In fact, that dog had 2 chips. And these were older dogs, so I don't know what the connection was. Both Fawn and Keto were older dogs. Evidently these chips were used at one stage in this breeder arrangement. Some of these Carolina dogs had actually come over from Indiana, another breeder gone bad, and they had transferred some of these dogs over to Auburn, Illinois. So a lot of the younger dogs had no chips, but these older dogs did. So after many days of desperate messages back and forth with Jan in North Carolina, with news of search efforts and even our offer to help pay for whatever we could possibly do, we got this very heartbreaking message that Fawn is gone. Fawn had been found on the side of a highway. She was in great shape, perfect shape. These dogs can survive in the wild very, very well. So that is what we learned. Okay, so she's very sorry. She's crying. Jan's crying. I'm mad as can be. This dog had been transferred to at least 2 foster homes and then into another home. That was way too much transferring of a skittish dog around. But, that's what we learned. That's where we learned things went bad. So the value of this saga to the microchip discussion is that there are so many possibilities of things that can go wrong, human error, everything else. But microchip providers, including database managers and shelter software integrators and products promotion, must grasp that they are playing with fire. We are trying to rely on their product. We are when it comes to when we need them the most, there is a huge sense of urgency and high anxiety at the time. We are trying to find a lost pet. The changes in technology, ever-changing integration of databases with shelter software, the new brands coming onto the market, and their market ploys all do not help stabilize the functionality of these chips. When they do not function as promised, the result is devastating. Fault lines in reliability. Maybe isn't helpful. We need to know that these chips are going to work. We need better help when we are getting from these pet products industry, which happens to be a very thriving, prosperous industry, and we can do better. Rest in peace, our precious girl. To end on a little happier note, Fawn was a traumatic disaster. And we loved her dearly. She was an older girl. We have placed 28 of these dogs. We've got 1 left, but these are the happy families. They've become wonderfully well-bonded pets. Once we get through the transition, we had to work with all these families. That was part of the pressures on us at the time. We stayed with these families the whole 3, 4, 5 weeks of the original. We were calling them, we were helping them, we were visiting them to make sure these dogs stayed in place. And they have become an incredible community among themselves. We have reunions and they all support each other. We have a dedicated Facebook page. We haven't lost another dog. They just rave about these dogs. It is a very cool phenomena. And in fact, one of our adopters did this piece of art of the animal coming out of the wild, which I just love. So that is what I have to contribute.
Thank you,
And I
Jane. That was a very interesting saga and obviously very difficult. Obviously, all of our panelists have some incredible background experience in this. We're going to go ahead and take a quick 5-minute break, and we'll be back to have a discussion on some of the topics that have been touched on earlier. So look forward to seeing everyone in a few minutes. We'll start at 5:25. Everyone can come back on. I did neglect to mention at the beginning of the program that that this program did receive support from the International Institute for Animal Law. I forgot to mention that. So the other, as we go forward now, I know that there have been some questions that have been placed in the Q&A, and I know that Jeanette has been answering some of them, and Susan has, and anyone on the panel can certainly jump in and answer questions. One of the questions that came up was about buying microchips, for example, from Amazon. I know Jeanette had mentioned there's at least 42 microchip companies, and there's so many that are coming about so quickly. So how does a person know, whether it's a good idea to buy a microchip from a particular company? Does Jeanette and Susan, do you want to jump in with that?
Yeah. Well, I think it should be a company that participates in AHA. That's definitely a factor. And really, that's the main thing, because if you know where the chip is registered and you can contact the chip company, it's perfect.
And can you just remind everyone, because I know you were answering it individually, just in terms of how they can verify that the chip is registered?
Yeah, you just go in their own chip.
If they can verify for their own animal.
Yeah, so they just go into the pet microchiplookup.com. It's AHA, AAHA. And that will show where the chip is registered, if it is, or if not, where to call to go ahead and register it.
Anything else we want to add before I move on to another topic about that? So one of the things that struck me as we were discussing you all brought up a lot of really practical issues that you've seen firsthand, been involved with. So I guess one of the questions or the themes as I was trying to kind of glean was the issue about ownership. So a shelter is presented with an animal that has a microchip, and maybe, I think Lauren was the one who said, if there might be a rabies tag that's registered to somebody else. So how do we sort out? I think either Zandra or Jane said, it's not dispositive. It's not the only, it's one piece of information, but how do we sort these things out to know who the owner is? And so we know where to return the animal to. I'll let whoever wants to jump in.
If I can, if I may interject, it would be a good idea to, in the definition of ownership, clarify what takes precedence in regard to ownership. If an animal comes in with a current rabies tag, and then a microchip that comes from 5 years before, there needs to be some sort of something that we can point to that says the rabies tag takes precedence over that. Unfortunately, perhaps the person came by the animal without the original owner's knowledge, but after that length of time and if they've taken proper care of the animal and they've had it vaccinated and registered, we would default to that. But there needs to be some sort of definitive language in the state act. We have it in our local law, but somehow defining what is the hierarchy of ownership.
I think that a lot of places, a lot of local governments also confuse ownership by saying that if a person possesses a dog or a cat, but particularly a dog, because they can get you into some trouble, for a certain number of days, then they're the owner. But they're really not the owner. They're not the legal owner. So statutes and ordinances that address that should say, really make them possessors, but liable for the dog if they're keeping and feeding the dog on their property, and they try to skirt liability if the dog has gone off and bitten someone, because that's what happens. So another way to prove ownership of the animal are pictures, anything, vet records, anything with pet registration with the city or the county, AKC registration or another registry. So there are a lot of ways to prove ownership before we ever had microchips. Because microchips are mandatory in certain places, but we know from experience, mandatory much of anything doesn't work. So there are other ways that can prove an animal is owned other than a microchip. So the microchip's a great indication of ownership, but so are all the other things. And as Lauren has mentioned, the current rabies tag or the current rabies certificate is certainly a very helpful tool.
Just to
It's
piggyback,
interesting.
yeah,
Go
just to
ahead. No, please.
piggyback on that a little bit. I find it sad that the rabies tag would take precedent, because if the dog is taken somewhere and getting a rabies vaccination, why aren't they scanning to see if that dog has a microchip and has an owner before giving
Not
that
a re-
rabies
that is
vaccine?
that is not a requirement for a
Correct.
veterinarian.
No, I know.
If a veterinarian's client comes in and presents an animal as their new pet, veterinarian can't be an enforcer to scan it
Right.
and say, prove to me that you got
Not
this
proved to
animal an
me, but
appropriate way.
here's the microchip. This dog
But
has a microchip.
True. But if it's, people like to liken the microchip to a VIN number on a car, because that,
Yeah.
it's permanent. It's always there. The problem is we don't track our animals that way. There doesn't have to be a transfer of ownership. There doesn't have to be a bill of sale. There doesn't have to be any of that licensing and registry when somebody gives their dog away. And that's the problem, is that these animals fall in this hole. If a stray animal is taken in by somebody, they hold it for a few months, nobody comes for it, they don't know it has a chip, they take it in. Is it the veterinarian's responsibility to scan it?
That's a really interesting question, and certainly I want to guide this conversation towards solutions. I think the first part of our program, we really highlighted all of the problems that we've identified, but the focus for this portion is really to see what sort of solutions, and particularly legislative solutions. And so it's interesting, I think, whether we should, require vets to scan an animal is a good question. It's interesting. There's, three of us are lawyers, and the fact is that we all know that there's nothing, like when we look at, is it a rabies tag? Is it vet records? Is it a microchip? I mean, all these things, we all know that things are every case is fact specific. So it's hard to try to codify something to say this is how things should be prioritized when it's a bit challenging to figure out how we could provide more guidance for animal control and animal shelter facilities in Illinois.
It seems that in Texas, and our legislature appropriately meets in only the odd years, because they do some really odd things. But one of the bills that you constantly see are mandatory scan bills for animal control and whoever comes in possession of an animal. The problem is that the bill didn't have the next sentence, the big what if. So what if animal control does scan? Then these bills have been woefully inadequate of what their responsibility is once they find an owner. And, it would be great if all the dogs that came into animal control these days had owners or had somebody wanting them. And it's a conundrum when you have two people fighting, or at least two, over who owns a dog, because at the end of the day, there's so many that need homes. But if it's your dog, you're going to want your dog back for sure. And there are times when a person finds a dog that's not their dog, they run out, slap a chip in it, get a rabies tag and they think that's a home run, because it's not. As we've said, even rabies tags can be an indication of ownership, but are not a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, so by law, the microchip is supposed to be on the rabies registration. So those things are supposed to be filed together. So when you do a rabies registration in Illinois, you also have to put that microchip number. And now, do they do it? Do the vets always get that on there? Not so much, maybe, but that's what needs to be done. Also, I know Sangamon County has done a little bit of this, but particularly with cats, is register to the microchip, only to the microchip, and not issue tags. So this does get to be, an interpretation. Our ownership definitions are truly for the purpose of enforcement, enforcement of animal control provisions, enforcement for the Humane Care Act. I think we rely on common law transactional law for ownership definitions as far as transactional ownership. So that's something that needs to be balanced when we start messing with the ownership issue, I think.
And you were talking about what are possible solutions or possible ways to mitigate some of these issues. It's disturbing to me that the groups that are making all the money from the microchips and the scanners are not standardized or held to any kind of standard whatsoever. And while it would be great to do something in Illinois, that needs to be, I realize, at the federal level, which is tougher. But we're transferring so many animals in and out of our states that trying to do something in Illinois won't necessarily won't have the impact that we want it to have because there's so much transferring. But these groups that are these chip companies that keep popping up right and left, what is the standardization that they have to meet to manufacture a chip, to maintain a registry, to guarantee that that registry will stay in place, and the requirements that they have to transfer registrations?
And actually, that brings up an interesting topic. A couple of people have commented in the chat or in the Q&A about, is this, or should we be looking at state and or federal legislation? And obviously, I believe both. But I wanted some, comments here from the group as far as, I think Jeanette was the one who originally pointed out that there was a microchip company that went out of business. And obviously, that left a big problem, which to me, I think needs to be addressed at the federal level. Does anyone want to jump in on that one?
I would. I absolutely agree. I think what they're asking people to do is rely on those products for the very purpose of that they will be there. And this business of handing out sample chips that aren't registered, so much of this really truly needs to be regulated. Just because the reliance, what this product is supposed to be. So I agree that I think that's something that needs to be taken up on a national level, because and is coming in and out of it's just nuts. And it's, they should be required. If AHA is the place to look, when this chip company I dealt with, I did ultimately look at AHA. It's nowhere to be found on AHA, and so and I'm in the business. I didn't even know how to, bad on me, but so it's just, it really needs to be addressed because people do rely on this. We always tell people, chip your animals, we're always scan the animals, and even though Lauren says that, in Illinois, it doesn't tell you what you do once you scan it. I think we all know what we need to do as private shelters and animal control. We're looking for an indication of ownership. That's what we're doing, and we're trying to get to those people. So I definitely agree. Appreciate it.
But back to just a little bit more on the federal legislation part. Obviously, I think that we should have some requirements that the information has to be transferred so that if the microchip company has collected all this information, that they can't just say, oh, we're out of business, and there's no there's a dead end that these chips are found to. Anybody else have thoughts?
Nope, I agree 100%. That was just the worst thing. We've gotten so many microchip cases in that are Save This Life chips. And they're very hard.
So one of the questions that I've seen a couple in the Q&A is, what can we do to help? How do we educate, like, where do we start to educate people? So I'll throw that back out to the group. Susan, Jeanette, either of you want to jump in on that one?
I mean, Lost Dogs Illinois, we educate all the time about microchips, keeping them registered, keeping them up to date.
Should the answer be they should volunteer with Lost Dogs Illinois?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good idea. No, actually, when we do all our, I don't know, what was it, 3 years or 4 years, we microchipped almost 10,000 animals in Chicago. And each one of those animals received a small card with what to do with their microchip, like keep them quiet for 24 hours, go back and check, because we actually scanned them at the clinics. I mean, scanned them, we registered them at the clinics.
We registered every chip and asked them to make sure all the information was entered correctly, because some of their handwriting wasn't great. There's human error, as somebody mentioned earlier, and
I mean,
so we do try to educate about that all the time.
We put flat tips out, on that, and
when we post lost dogs, we text owners, same thing. We text them, check your chip, check with the chip company, flag your animal as missing.
But I think
that's why.
I was gonna say it happens too is when, like shelters and rescues, because I've been on that side. When we adopt out an animal, we give them paperwork this thick, and then expect them to go home and register that chip in their name. Well, by the time you get home, you got the stack of paper, but you want to spend that time with, your newly adopted dog or cat. So I think a lot of it goes back to where you're getting that chip, where it's being inserted. That facility, that vet hospital, that rescue should be registering that dog at the point. And then also explain, even if you have to give a little 3x5 card or something and explain, and it'll probably go in one ear and out the other, but at least you've done your part on that.
Well, and that kind of brings up an interesting topic. So we talked a little bit about federal legislation, but as far as state legislation that I think we all have an interest in, and Zandra, I know you being from Texas, we obviously, if we could craft something good, it could be used in other states. But I wonder whether this group thinks that there should be some requirement that whoever is inserting the microchip should have to register the microchip on the spot. I mean, some of the things that people have talked about include, a rescue that says, hey, we're not going to actually register the animal, and we're not going to tell the adopter, because then if the animal goes missing, then we're going to get to decide whether that person was irresponsible or not, which really isn't what the law says, and it's really not their decision to make. So is that something? I mean, I'm trying to figure out kind of what we can extrapolate from this robust conversation that could actually be kind of translated into some legislation.
Yeah,
I know that Susan and I talked about some legislation a few years ago, and we even had the bill introduced that required anyone who found a pet to have it scanned and to notify animal control that they had a particular animal. And then, whatever happened to it on the backside if the owner couldn't be found. But it required that there be a scanning procedure done in there. The Illinois Animal Welfare Federation and the Illinois Animal Control Association have also been looking at tightening up the requirements for those of us who have to chip, shelters and animal control, and require that the registration take place at the time of the animal going out the door, and that the registration be done to the person who is taking the animal out the door, whether it's the new owner as an adopter or the previous owner, that shelters are required to make that registration into that person's name. That would be very helpful. And somebody whoever had asked what could be done, one of the things that would be really helpful, there are a lot of small communities and small shelters and small rescues and small animal control facilities that don't have scanners still. And finding a way to fund getting scanners into the hands of those groups would be very helpful. And getting scanners into the hands of law enforcement, sheriff's departments, police departments, those people who on emergency call might have their hands on a stray pet, and try to get scanners to those people, so that would be one quicker way for the animal to get home.
And, and it's been a while since I've priced microchip scanners, and they were a lot more expensive the last time I did, which was quite a while ago. What are they selling for now, just so people have an idea?
So we just bought for our sheriff's department these very small scanners. I called them key change scanners. They weren't that small, but and they were $20, so I sent them 12, and they're gonna see how it goes, and we'll do that with SPD as well. So
Susan,
Wow.
we
they
can't
were
hear you.
universal scanners. So
And who were they through? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
I can't tell you off the top of my head, but we got them from Amazon. But I can't remember the company.
Okay.
And wow, and they scan the 9-digit and 10-digit also.
Yes, they do.
Wow. Okay.
So going back and trying to kind of think through a lot of the questions that came up along the way. There was one, and again, I'm getting everyone confused now as far as who said what. So somebody had brought up the fact that information wasn't being readily disseminated. So if an animal control or an animal shelter had actually inserted the microchip, and the information was not indicated as far as the owner of the animal, that there was some issue about privacy. Again, how can we address some of these things legislatively? Anyone can jump in.
Yeah, I like that Texas amendment where you said that, that the release of the owner's information for the microchip registration or whatever is not covered under the client-patient relationship. I think that was really important. It's a pretty simple fix for that.
But what if it's not good?
It needs to be standardized that microchip companies release the information to the person who's holding the animal and is called in, instead of insisting that they call the owner or calling you back. Or there should be instantaneous ways to get that information, because some of these animals are in bad shape and need immediate care, and we can't do anything for them without knowing who the owners are.
I think that's quickly fixed too on the chip information, that when the owner buys it or registers it, that they are agreeing to have their information disseminated to the finder. And that way you take out that interim step. And it also puts the onus on the owner to come forward rather than relying on the chip company to make that call. If you can connect the finder with the chip information, who the owner is.
Well, and I was going to say too, like it should be automatically, you get that information, because you don't know if they're really calling the owner.
Yeah.
And if they call the owner, it could be a wrong number. And then at least if you knew it was a wrong number, you could sit there and send a request to Microchip help and get it researched. Or if you have volunteers in your shelters that, do really good research. I mean, that's, another reason why it should be, automatically given to you when you call in.
Or you could drive the animal home if you have it in your
Right.
truck.
Right.
It is so disturbing to have the inability to track the information instantaneously like we can if we just plug in our rabies tag. And I just want to be clear that we try everything we can to track down and trace those chips all the way to the ends of the earth to see if we can't get that animal home. It is in our best interest for that animal to be reclaimed. So we all try our best in animal control and animal shelters alike to make sure those animals find their way home from those microchips. It's just sometimes not that easy, right, Jeanette?
Right. It's frustrating. But I think, Cherie, you were talking about the facility that wasn't allowing information to be disseminated, correct? Not the chip company?
There was a shelter in the south suburbs of Chicago that
Yeah,
actually, the Will County State's Attorney had to issue a subpoena to get information about a microchip while a dog sat at Will County Animal Control in a cage. And I thought, it makes no sense. And the lawyer representing the shelter said, well, there's an expectation of privacy, which I think is exactly the opposite of the entire point of a microchip is that the person can be contacted. There's an expectation in Illinois law, I would argue, that if my animal winds up in a shelter, that's their obligation to try to find me. So it was very surprising that the attorney took that a state's attorney actually had to issue a subpoena to get information.
yeah, we run across issue with that facility a lot. They do make a courtesy call for us, but as Susan said, we don't know if the number's going through or not going through. We were told that their clients actually sign something that says that they will not be provided information if, that their information is held private. So, instead of the other way around, rather,
And I guess,
and these are
I can
unregistered chips, obviously. So
well, and
if
I can
we
understand,
do get immediate registration requirements, we won't have this issue.
but there wouldn't be a privacy issue if it was for law enforcement. If a government agency
I
were to
know.
contact them, that's clearly that's different than just giving information to somebody off the street. So what other things in the few minutes we have remaining, and I apologize that we're not getting to all the questions, but I do want to kind of focus on the big issue, which is how we write legislation to even Susan pointed out, even the fact that we don't have a mechanism like texting. It's the current Animal Control Act says we send something by mail. Well, that means that the animal can literally be sitting in a cage for days longer than it needs to be if we could text. The animal could go home same day if we could text them.
Yeah.
Feel free to.
I think
Prohibited.
all chip companies should be required to participate in AHA or one centralized search engine. So that we can find the chip company or the source if we need to. And I think, as Lauren, mentioned, microchip companies need to be able to provide owner information 24 hours and access for owners to update their chips 24 hours, report them missing, register them if their dog goes lost, and they don't want to wait 2 days to get their chip registered. So I think those things definitely need to be addressed. But I think the main issue, if you could get immediate registration, we've worked on microchips that have gone to, animals are at animal control, they get reunited, we check the chips a week later, still all the wrong contact information. So, it needs to be updated immediately. These animals get lost more than one time. So I'm a big proponent of that.
Cherie, there's, a question. Is there some confidentiality law in Illinois that a person's information cannot be given out?
Not for microchips. Confidentiality is for very specific things like
Okay.
HIPAA or financial information or highly personal. The entire point of a microchip is that the person can be contacted. So there's absolutely no law in Illinois, and Jane can jump in if you know otherwise, but that makes no sense to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's the whole point of the chips. That's the whole, it's in law. That's why we put them in animal welfare and animal control. I don't know if we can, this is really wild, but I don't know if we can require owners to register those chips.
Well, what I think should be done is it should the onus should be on whoever. So if if it's a microchip clinic, I mean, we just did a vaccine clinic recently in Chicago, and Jeanette said, make sure, I mean, we had laptops right there so that we could be inputting information and registering them. When I'm taking a chance, they're going to walk out the door, and then we're going to have to try to figure out. And we actually had a lot of backup. So it was, not just the owner's information. We collected a lot of different information on the owner, email, phone number, address, so that we could find them in a variety of different ways, plus backup information. I think that whoever is inserting the microchip should have to register on site. That's
Yes.
my thought.
Right. Yeah, we've done chip clinics where we still use Avid, and we have their prepaid forms, and we don't even let them walk out with it. We put them in the mail and the like. And we do that to the best of our ability with our adopters too, and then double check back. Now the 24 pet is such a big thing. I've been tracking with our Carolina dogs to make sure they're all registered, so.
I mean, I remember years ago where Cook County was, and I'm hoping they've changed a long time ago, but they had all their records in boxes. And if you found a dog that was still registered to Cook County, it would be days for them to, and a lot of manpower for them to actually find the information. I mean, I'm hoping that's all changed, but I think that it should be registered on site, or, when the vet inserts at whatever point they can, it's the owner is getting that dog or cat. What other things we're getting short on time, and I want to make sure we're hitting. And thank you, Susan, for mentioning that question. If the other things, I'm trying to look at the questions and trying to keep the conversation. So, what other things do you think are important for the takeaways from this conversation? Zandra, you want to jump in?
Well, I think that, of course, getting the pets registered properly is important, and also trying to spearhead legislation that would facilitate the owner's information being able to be disseminated directly to the finder, as well as getting some of the legislation that falsely identifies an owner as a possessor. Also getting that language cleaned up so that you don't have that confusion. It makes no sense. If somebody's had your dog for 6 days and they've been feeding it, they could be secreting it away from you. Why are they the owner? Even though many of your local laws say so. And it makes no sense whatsoever. It was done strictly so that the possessor would not avoid liability for a dog bite or a dangerous dog situation. It had nothing to do with true ownership. So
Well,
those-
it doesn't, Zandra, but it's for enforcement of humane care and for public safety. So whoever has possession and custody and control of that animal has a responsibility. So that's the
Right.
that's the tension there. And so that's why I'm wondering if there's another way to deal with this and not mess with those definitions, because those definitions are incredibly important when we enforce the Humane Care Act and the Public Safety Acts.
Well, I think the definition of owner is one thing. The definition of a possessor who then wants to disavow ownership is different, because an owner is a legal sense of ownership, whereas possession and feeding a stray animal, they can still be responsible for that animal without saying legally they're the owner. And I'm not discrediting at all what the act says. I'm saying, from my experience in some of the local laws, that's how some conflict has arisen. And there's just a way to do it verbally to massage that law so that it makes it clear that there is a legal owner, but a possessor of an animal cannot exonerate themselves by saying, well, I'm not the owner. They have responsibility. Anyone who possesses an animal has responsibility for that animal. And that's really, I think, the tenor of the law and what it's intending to do, so that people can't skirt their responsibilities or for dangerous dog and for bite things as well.
One of the comments on the Q&A was addressing, the information being released, and we were talking about confidentiality, and the person said that, unfortunately, scammers might take advantage of microchip ownership issues, so identifying info might be problematic. So the information, under state law could be that the information about the owner could, it could be limited to a government agency or a licensed animal shelter.
One of the chip companies that we register to, they actually have a checkbox stating if you are allowed to provide their information to anybody. So, that is something that maybe is a workaround. In
And
addition,
what
though,
would happen if they said no? I mean, that doesn't,
then, then agencies can get it, but not the public. It's
Gotcha.
for the public.
Gotcha.
Yeah. That's
Okay,
one
so
of the big chip
we're
companies.
down to the wire here. Any final comments, observations, conclusions we want to leave people with?
If I could just, there's a question in there about a shelter that takes in a stray that's microchip, but the owner gave the dog away years ago, doesn't know can't remember who they gave it to. Does that microchip connection mean that they have a responsibility to the dog now? And no, they don't, because it's not proof of ownership, especially if they're telling you that they've given the dog away or they sold the dog or whatever. And this was a big point of contention when we tried to talk about notifying primary and secondary contacts, because people who microchip their animals and then turn around and sell them or give them away don't want to be on the hook for something that dog does under the new owner's custody, in the new owner's custody. So that's another reason the ownership question is kind of murky. It identifies who had the animal chipped, but it doesn't necessarily identify who's got legal responsibility for that animal now.
Transfer of ownership is huge. Needs to be another
Lauren,
thing that needs to be addressed.
I don't know, are we okay with telling people, when someone says, I've exhausted, now I've called animal control, I'm going to keep the dog. We always tell them, no, wait, we always say when someone is getting someone else's dog and it's microchip, to make sure they do a transfer of ownership from the old owner so they can send it to the microchip company to change it. Is that appropriate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. If they're changing owners, then definitely making sure that the microchip reflects that.
Yeah. Can we just there's one lady that says for protection of the animal. Oh, who just did that? In domestic violent cases, do microchip companies have the capacity to update chip registration to prevent the abuser from registering as the owner or maintaining ownership? Look at Lauren, she's smiling.
Divorces and domestic violence cases are the worst nightmare with ownership of animals, because if they're both living with the animal, I don't know that makes any difference if the microchip gets switched from one thing to the other. Because wouldn't that be a legal matter to be decided in court as to who the owner was?
Right, and the other thing is that, if you've got an abuser, the animal could be under a protection order. I mean, if there's ways that we've tried to work with the Domestic Violence Act and the Stalking Act and all those kind of aspects, but yeah, they are very difficult, but the whole DV world is difficult, so.
And that's almost more than what we can tackle for this program. But I just want to make sure that we're kind of leaving people with some continuity here. Obviously, if they have questions about situations in Illinois, reach out to Lost Dogs Illinois, certainly can contact. And if there's follow-up, they can reach out to the Center for Animal Law through Brett Davinger. I gave his email address at the beginning, bdavinger minus the R at DePaul.edu. I'm C Travis too at DePaul.edu. And I would love to see this become some legislation. There's obviously a lot of room for improvement. So I hope that this panel can work together on some legislation that could be model legislation nationwide, that any state could take our legislation forward. So any final comments? Again, thanks so much to Susan and Jeanette. This was a really important topic. We had a lot of response, good turnout, and a lot of good questions. So, and thanks to the Center for Animal Law at DePaul.